The marble was cold through the fabric of her uniform. Molly Bowman had addressed the United Nations General Assembly 3 years ago. She had appeared on the cover of Time magazine at 31. She had shaken the hands of presidents, refused the advances of princes, and built a foundation from a single donated room in a Lagos community center into a global organization operating across 47 countries. Right now, she was on her knees in a hallway, scrubbing a floor that Suan Kang had just walked across in heels that cost more than Molly's first car. Without looking down,
I want the floor looking
without
sparkling
breaking
before
stride,
the guests arrive.
Without acknowledging that another human being was less than 3 feet beneath her. There is still residue by the skirting board, Suan said, to no one in particular, in the flat tone of a woman who had never cleaned anything herself. I want it spotless before the florist arrives. She was already gone. The sharp percussion of her heels fading into the east wing. Her laughter, on the phone with someone, drifting back around the corner like an afterthought. Molly sat back on her heels. Looked at the floor. Looked at her own reflection in the gleaming stone, headscarf, oversized uniform, no jewelry, no makeup, no trace of the woman she actually was. Good. She had 3 more days before the Kang Society charity gala, which Suan had, in a moment of exquisite cruelty, invited the MAID to attend. As entertainment. As a joke the entire guest list would understand and enjoy. She said, "I'm hosting my annual society charity gala on Saturday," Suan said, holding out the cream envelope as though it were something mildly distasteful. The theme is elevation. The smile she offered was silk covering something that had teeth. I thought it might be educational for you to see how the other half lives. Consider it a professional development opportunity. Someone in the small audience laughed. The laugh stopped almost immediately. Molly took the envelope. "Thank you, Mrs. Kang. I'd be honored to attend." Molly picked up her cloth and went back to work. And somewhere across the city, in a climate-controlled wardrobe in her foundation's private suite at the Meridian Hotel, a gold gown that had been photographed at the Lagos Humanitarian Summit was hanging in the dark. Waiting. Suan Kang had absolutely no idea what she had just invited to her gala. Suan has terrorized every person in that mansion for 3 years. Not one of them has dared breathe wrong in her direction. Molly Bowman has been scrubbing her floors for 90 days without a single word back. But the gala is in 3 days. And if you think you already know how this ends, you do not know what Molly is walking into that ballroom carrying. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. This story is about to take a turn that Suan will spend the rest of her life trying to recover from. There is a particular kind of power that lives in invisibility. Molly Bowman understood this long before she set foot in the Kang estate. She had understood it the way you understand something tested repeatedly across a lifetime of being the person that certain rooms looked through rather than at. She had learned, early, that invisibility was not a wound. It was a tool. And she had become very, very good at using it. The Bowman Foundation's forensic audit team had flagged the discrepancy 14 months earlier. Charitable donations processed through Kang Luxury Holdings, routed through their corporate social responsibility program, had been arriving at the foundation's account 17% short. Consistently. Over 11 months. Across 9 separate transactions totaling $430,000. It was not the largest theft the foundation had ever encountered. It was, however, the most brazen. Whoever was doing it had done it with the confidence of someone who believed the foundation either wouldn't notice or wouldn't dare to come looking. Molly noticed everything. And she had never once been deterred by the word dare. She could have sent lawyers. Her legal team had 3 senior partners who existed precisely for situations like this. She could have sent investigators, forensic accountants, a quiet professional team who would have traced the thread in weeks. Instead, she had called her assistant Ren, cleared 90 days from her calendar, and walked into a domestic employment agency in Seoul under the name that was technically her own, just the version of it nobody outside her family had used since she was 9 years old. Miss Bowman, the agency coordinator, had said, looking at her modest CV with barely concealed confusion. This position is entry-level housekeeping. The Kang estate is a very demanding environment. I'm a hard worker, Molly had said simply. She started the following Monday. In 90 days inside the Kang estate, she had learned several things. She had learned that Jung Chul Kang was not the man his reputation suggested, not at home. He was quiet, fair to his staff in the way of a man who had decided, at some specific point, that cruelty in small spaces was beneath him. He knew the housekeeper's daughter's name. He thanked people. He was building something legitimately clean from a complicated foundation, and doing it with the quiet determination that Molly recognized because she had spent her own career doing exactly the same thing. She had also confirmed that the missing $430,000 led, without question, to a private account linked to Suan Kang's personal expenditure portfolio. Not Jung Chul's. His wife's. The evidence had been complete for 3 weeks. And yet Molly was still here. She had stopped asking herself why. She was beginning to understand the answer. And the answer was more complicated than the evidence had been. The Kang estate ran on fear. Not the loud, dramatic kind. Suan Kang was far too composed for theatre. Her fear was architectural. It was built into the rhythm of the house, into the way footsteps quickened when her car was heard on the drive, the way conversation stopped mid-sentence when she appeared in a doorway, the way Nobby, the youngest of the housekeeping staff, had developed the habit of pressing herself against the wall when she passed to give the widest possible berth. Nobby was 22 and had been at the estate 8 months. In that time, Suan had reduced her to tears on 4 separate occasions. Once for folding napkins incorrectly. Once for having the temerity to sneeze in the dining room. Once for a reason nobody could afterwards remember. And once simply because Suan had come off a difficult phone call and Nobby was the first person she encountered. Molly had watched all for incidents. She had said nothing, because saying something would have cost Nobby her job before it helped her. She had instead stayed after hours and helped the girl redo whatever had been found wanting. She had made tea and sat at the kitchen table and let Nobby cry for as long as she needed to. Then, without making a production of it, moved on. It was Nobby who first noticed that Molly was different. "You're not afraid of her," Nobby said one evening, 3 weeks in, while they were folding linen in the basement utility room. "I respect the position," Molly said carefully. "That's not the same thing." Nobby looked at her with the directness of someone who had been frightened long enough to recognize its absence in others. "Everyone is afraid of her. Even Mr. Taijun is careful around her. And that man is afraid of nothing." Taijun was Jung Chul's head of personal security, a lean, precise man in his mid-40s with the particular economy of movement that came from 2 decades of professional vigilance. He was observant in the way of people trained to notice things. And he had been noticing Molly since her 2nd week. She had felt his attention the way you feel a camera following you through a room, not aggressive, just consistent. Cataloguing. He had not said anything. Yet. "Mrs. Kang runs her household the way she chooses to run it," Molly said. "That is her right. She threw a vase at Hannah last month," Nobby said flatly. "I know. It missed. But still." "It missed," Molly agreed. "Hand me those pillowcases." That was how Molly moved through the estate. Observing. Absorbing. Building a picture in the encrypted notebook she kept in the lining of her jacket. Transaction times overheard in passing. Account references glimpsed on documents left carelessly in rooms she had been sent to clean. The pattern of Sue-Ann's private Thursday calls, which happened every week in the East Wing sitting room with the door almost closed. Almost. Not quite. The evidence had been complete for 21 days. Something else was keeping her here, and she had stopped pretending it was diligence. Jung Chul, who ran a city and came home to a house running on dread, and met it with the specific exhaustion of a man carrying something he had not yet found the courage to set down. Who had thanked the groundskeeper this morning about his son's university application with the careful attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know the answer. Who had passed Molly in the North Corridor last Tuesday and paused for a fraction of a second before continuing on. He had not stopped. He had not spoken. But the pause had stayed with her like a question she hadn't been asked yet. A moment. The evidence has been complete for 3 weeks. Tai-jun has been watching Molly since week 2. Nobby just said it missed, but still with the energy of someone writing a formal complaint. And Jung Chul paused in a corridor and then kept walking like a man who is extremely committed to minding his own business. Subscribe right now, because a woman running a $1.7 billion foundation is scrubbing floors for reasons that stopped being entirely professional at least 2 weeks ago. This is about to get very interesting. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday. Not slid under her door. Not delivered to her room with a note. Sue-Ann presented it in person, in the middle of the main corridor, in front of 4 members of the household staff, with the timing of a woman who understood that an audience amplified everything she did. "I'm hosting my annual society charity gala on Saturday," Sue-Ann said, holding out the cream envelope as though it were something mildly distasteful. "The theme is elevation." The smile she offered was silk covering something that had teeth. "I thought it might be educational for you to see how the other half lives. Consider it a professional development opportunity." Someone in the small audience laughed. The laugh stopped almost immediately. Molly took the envelope. "Thank you, Mrs. Kang. I'd be honored to attend." Sue-Ann blinked. She had expected gratitude slightly embarrassing in its excess, or the quietly pained expression of someone who understood the joke. Molly's response was neither. It was composed, direct, and precisely measured enough to suggest she understood rather more than was comfortable. "See that you wear something appropriate," Sue-Ann said, and walked away. Nobby appeared at Molly's elbow the moment the corridor was clear. "She's going to tell the event staff you're with catering," she whispered. "That's what she did 2 years ago when she invited Hannah to the summer party." "I know." Molly turned the invitation in her hand. The Kang Estate seal. The word elevation in careful gold lettering. "You're still going?" "Absolutely." Molly looked at the envelope for a moment. Then, Nobby. "What time does Mrs. Kang usually leave for the venue on gala evening?" "Early. She likes to arrive 2 hours before guests." "Why?" "Because," Molly said, tucking the invitation into her pocket, "I intend to arrive fashionably late." That evening, from her small staff bedroom, she made a call. "Ren," she said when her assistant answered. "I need the gold Clio Asante. The one from the Lagos summit." 2 seconds of silence. Then, "Molly. Are you blowing your cover?" "I'm strategically concluding my research." That is a very elegant way of saying yes. "The evidence has been complete for 3 weeks. I have everything I came for. What I haven't done is look Sue-Ann Kang in the eye and let her see who she's been stepping over." "Right." Ren's voice shifted into its working register. "Suite at the Meridian. Hair and makeup team. What time do you want the car?" "A beat." "And Molly, the gala is on the society calendar. Foundation donors will be there. Board members. The press." "I know," Molly said. "Everyone is going to recognize you." That, Molly said quietly, is rather the point. She put the phone down, sat on the narrow staff bed, listened to the estate settle around her, thought about 90 days of this house, Nobby's tears, Hannah's story, the groundskeeper who flinched at sounds from behind him, the way even Tai-jun went careful in Soo-an's presence. Thought about Jung-chul at the study window. About the pause in the corridor that had never quite finished becoming something. She would deal with that later. Saturday was 4 days away. Tai-jun found her in the archive room on Thursday morning. The finding was not accidental. He had the quality of someone who locates people when he decides to, and the archive room was not a place housekeeping staff had business being in unless specifically directed. Molly had been directed there 3 days ago to organize a set of household files that had grown chaotic. She had taken considerably longer than necessary. Tai-jun had clearly noticed. He stood in the doorway, looked at her, looked at the file she had been working through, looked at her again with the methodical expression of a man assembling final pieces. "You're not a maid," he said. Molly did not look up from the folder in her hands. "I've been performing the role adequately for 3 months. Most people would consider that sufficient qualification. Most people aren't me." He walked into the room and stopped at a professionally respectful distance. "I run security for one of the most surveilled private residences in Seoul. Background checks on every person through that gate. Yours came back clean. Thoroughly, professionally constructed clean. Which is the version of clean that isn't?" Molly set the folder down. Looked at him directly. "How long have you known?" "For weeks." "You haven't told Mr. Kang?" "No." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. He had a low tolerance for unnecessary speech, and when he used words they were worth listening to. "Because you're not a threat," he said. "Whatever you came here to find, it isn't about him." She studied him. He was right. And the certainty in his voice told her he had already formed a complete theory about who she was and what she had found. "The accounts," she said. "I've had my own concerns for some time." He paused carefully. "The Bowman Foundation. You conduct thorough due diligence for someone performing domestic work." So he did know. Entirely. "Are you going to tell him?" Molly asked. "He already knows something is wrong. He's been waiting for it to surface." Tai-jun's jaw set. "He also knows you're not who you say you are. He identified it himself 2 weeks ago and told me not to act on it until he understood why." Molly processed this carefully. "He's known me for 2 weeks." "Yes." "And he let me stay." "Yes." She looked at the shelves. At 3 months of this household, documented in her notebook and waiting on a secure server. At 2 weeks of Jung-chul knowing precisely who she was. Which meant the pause in the corridor had not been professional restraint. It had been something else. Something considerably more complicated. She filed that away. Saturday, Tai-jun said. "You're going to the gala?" "Yes." Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. Brief and contained. "There will be press. Foundation donors. People who know your face from the cover of publications Mrs. Kang has definitely never read." A pause. Madam Yun arrives at 11:30. Molly went still. Madam Yun attends every year. Every year. She sits at the head table. Half the donor community comes because of her. Tai-jun looked at Molly with the directness of a man placing a significant card on the table. "She knew your mother, Miss Bowman. She has known who you were since the day you arrived." The archive room held the silence for a full beat. "Madam Yun has said nothing," Molly said slowly. "Madam Yun, Tai-jun said, has been waiting. Real talk, Tai-jun knew for 4 weeks. Jung-chul knew for 2. And Madame Yun, the most formidable presence in that entire world, has known since the very first day and has not said a single word to anyone. She has just been sitting at the head table of her son's house, watching Soo-eun step over the wrong woman and waiting. Subscribe right now and stay close, because before Molly Bowman walks into that ballroom, there is one more conversation to survive. It is happening tonight. In Jung-chul's private study. With the door closed. And after it, nothing in that house will be the same. Jung-chul's private study was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the north corridor, behind a door the household staff treated collectively as a wall. In 3 months, Molly had been inside it once, to replace a lamp, on instruction, in under 3 minutes. She had spent those 3 minutes absorbing as much as the room offered. Floor-to-ceiling shelves. Architecture. Korean history. Development economics texts she recognized because several were on her own shelves, including 2 not widely circulated outside academic circles. A desk facing windows over the Eastern Garden. 2 photographs. An elderly Korean woman with the contained composure of someone who had survived genuinely difficult things. A younger version of Jung-chul with a man whose bearing made the blood connection obvious. His father, who had, Molly now understood, sat on the Foundation's advisory board for 2 years before he died. Who had visited her family's home when she was a child and been, she remembered clearly, very kind. Nobby delivered the summons with wide eyes and the restraint of someone who knew better than to ask questions. Mr. Kang would like to see you. He said when you have a moment, but the voice was the other one. Molly folded her cloth, set it on the windowsill, and went. Jung-chul was standing when she entered. Not because he had heard her coming, he was at the window, looking at the Eastern Garden, in the posture of a man who had been thinking long enough for it to move into his body. He turned when the door closed. He looked at her. Not through her, not past her. At her, with the steady, measuring attention he had been withholding in corridors and at kitchen doorways for 2 weeks. Sit down, he said. She Saturday. He remained standing, not as a power move, she decided. As a man who needed to be upright to think clearly. Tai-jun tells me you're attending the gala Saturday, he said. Your wife invited me. I know why she invited you. His voice was level. Not soft enough to be an apology, not hard enough to be a criticism. You don't have to go. I want to go. A pause in which he studied her face the way he had been studying it for 2 weeks, with the contained attention of someone trained not to react visibly to things that genuinely interest him. Not because you want to attend a charity gala, he said. No. Because you want her to see you. Yes. From somewhere in the East Wing came the faint sound of Soo-eun on her Thursday call, the voice Molly had catalogued over 12 weeks. Jung-chul heard it too. Something moved across his face that was older than anger and quieter than grief. How long have you known? Molly asked. About the accounts. He looked at her. Longer than I should have allowed, he said. The admission carried weight. I suspected. I was not ready for the confirmation to require what confirmation would require me to do. And now? Now I have documentation I didn't go looking for, from a source I didn't know was in my own house. He held her gaze. The Bowman Foundation. My father sat on your advisory board for 2 years. You knew that when you came here. Yes. And my mother. Your mother and mine worked together for 7 years on the Foundation Seoul chapter, Molly said. Madame Yun was one of the founding regional patrons. They were genuine friends. She paused. When your father came to our house, I was small enough that I had to look up to most adults. He sat at the same level as me and talked to me like I was worth talking to. I've remembered that my entire life. The silence that followed was the kind that arrives when separate pieces of a picture finally arrange into a coherent whole and the person looking needs a moment to absorb the full shape. You grew up knowing this family, Jungchul said slowly. From a distance. Enough to know what it was built on. She looked at him steadily. When I traced the stolen funds to your holding company, I did not believe initially that you knew. Your father's values were. I know what my father's values were, he said quietly. So I came to see for myself whether they were inherited. She held his gaze. You are not your father, Mr. Kang. But you are trying to build what he built, with cleaner hands. And that is something worth protecting. A long silence. The longest of the 3 months. Then, Saturday. You should go. A pause with specific weight. Go as yourself. I intend to. My mother will be there. The word mother carried permission in it. She has been asking me since your 3rd week why I was pretending not to know who was cleaning our floors. Molly, despite everything, laughed. It was brief and entirely genuine and it surprised them both. Jungchul looked at her when she laughed. As though it was the first unperformed sound this house had contained in a long time. Go, he said again. And Molly. He almost never used names, the household staff role or family name. The deliberate use of hers felt like a full sentence on its own. Show her everything. Molly stood. Move to the door. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. I let it run too long. This is the least available to me. She left him standing at the window looking out at a garden that was, she thought, beginning to grow into something different. The Meridian Hotel's private suite smelled of gardenias and the particular quiet of a space prepared with care. Ren was waiting with the gold Clio Asante gown laid across the bed like a second skin, the Foundation's communications leader Dee's on video call from Lagos, and a hair and makeup team briefed to understand that the woman walking into that ballroom was not going as a maid who had tidied herself up. She was going as herself. Which was an entirely different thing. Guest list, Ren said, handing Molly a tablet while the makeup team worked. 47 Foundation donors. 11 board members. Senior editors from 3 philanthropic journals. And director Yeo-Jin Beck from the Seoul chapter. She's been on the board 6 years and has been asking about your sabbatical since month 2. Does Yeo-Jin know I've been undercover? Nobody knows except Tai-jun and Mr. Kang. The world believes you've been on a private research trip in Asia. Ren paused. Which is technically accurate. It is technically accurate, Molly agreed. The dress is everything, Adi said through the call. Molly, Cleo outdid herself. You look like the cover of the announcement nobody saw coming. The Cleo Asante gown was floor-length, deep gold with an architectural shoulder structure that belonged to the language of buildings rather than clothes. It had been commissioned for the Lagos Summit and photographed in 4 publications. Anyone with knowledge of the design world, which included a significant proportion of every charity gala guest list in Asia, would recognize it on sight. Molly looked at herself in the mirror. The headscarf was gone. The oversized uniform was gone. The studied neutrality of someone performing invisibility was gone. What was left was the woman she had been before she walked through the Kang estate gates, and, she thought, somehow slightly more than that. 3 months of watching and enduring and building and choosing when to be still had added something she was only now beginning to measure. What time is it? She asked. 11:48. Madam Yun will already be there. Yes. Molly picked up the single piece of jewelry she had brought, a thin gold bracelet, plain, without stones. Her mother's. She wore it to every significant moment in her professional life, and she was wearing it tonight for reasons that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with a friendship between two women whose daughters were about to finish something they had begun. "Let's go," she said. The car reached the Grand Sejong Ballroom at 12 past midnight. Through the glass frontage, she could see the chandeliers, the density of expensive fabric, the society photographer stationed near the entrance since 10. She could see, distantly, the head table where Madame Yun always Saturday. Molly stepped out of the car, walked to the ballroom doors, and pushed them open. The doors opened and the ballroom breathed. That was how it felt, as though the room had been exhaling steadily all evening and then, at the sight of the woman in gold in the entrance, simply stopped. Conversation did not fade. It ceased. In sections, outward from the doors, a ripple of silence moving across 400 people like something dropped into still water. Heads turned. All of them. The involuntary kind of turning that happens when a room simultaneously recognizes something. Sue-Ann was at the center table. Mid-sentence. Mid-laugh. In a white gown that had been the evening's most expensive dress until approximately 12 seconds ago. She felt the room shift its attention and followed it, as she always did, expecting to find something she needed to manage. She found Molly Bowman. For a moment, Sue-Ann's mind simply refused the information. Because the woman in the entrance was wearing a gown she had seen in a magazine. A gown photographed at the Lagos Humanitarian Summit. A gown described in a full-page Vogue Africa feature. A gown that belonged to a body Sue-Ann had stepped over in a hallway 3 days ago while telling it about skirting board residue. Her champagne glass tilted. She corrected it, and the champagne sloshed and reached her wrist, and she did not notice. What Sue-Ann did not see, because she was looking at Molly, was the movement at the head table. Madame Yun rose. She was 74 years old, and she moved with the economy of someone who had never once in her life performed an unnecessary gesture. When Madame Yun stood at her own son's gala, the room paid attention. The ballroom, already silent, went somehow stiller. She looked at Molly across the full width of the room. And she smiled. Not a society smile. Not calibrated warmth. Something old and personal and long-awaited, the smile of a woman who has been holding a moment in reserve for exactly the right occasion and is now, finally, releasing it. "Molly," Madame Yun said. Her voice carried across the silent ballroom without effort. "You look exactly like your mother." The room erupted. Not in noise. In recognition. In the particular accelerating murmur of 400 people simultaneously identifying the woman in the entrance and trying to reconcile that identification with what they had just, by implication, been told about where she had been for 3 months. Director Yo Jin Beck was on her feet. Then 3 board members. Then the foundation donors who had received Molly's annual letters, attended her galas, sat in rooms where she had spoken about the work being done in countries that polite society preferred to reference abstractly. The society photographer was shooting continuously. Molly walked across the ballroom. She walked the way she walked into every room where she was expected to be small, with the unhurried, grounded certainty of a woman who had decided, at some early and specific point in her life, that she would never again shrink herself to make another person comfortable. She walked past Sue-Ann's table without looking at it. She walked to the head table. Madame Yun was still standing. Still smiling. And Molly took the elderly woman's hands in both of hers. "Madame Yun," she said. "I'm sorry I took so long." "You arrived at exactly the right time," Madame Yun said. "As you always do." She looked at Molly's face and something moved through her own that was tender and comprehensive and private. "Your mother would have enjoyed this evening enormously." "She would have," Molly said. She had a particular appreciation for a room going quiet at the right moment. Madame Yun laughed. The laugh of someone who had known the woman being described well enough to find the observation precisely accurate. At the center table, Suan Kang had not moved. So, Madam Yun just stood up for a woman Suan sent a prank invitation to. 400 people are doing the maths. The photographer has not stopped shooting. And Suan's very expensive white gown now has champagne on it. Subscribe and do not go anywhere, because Molly Bowman has not yet said a single word to the woman who invited her. She is about to. In front of everyone. While holding her late mother's bracelet and having nowhere else to be. Do not move. Molly waited. She had found across a career built in rooms that expected her to rush or react, the most powerful thing available to her. Not the entrance. Not the speech. The waiting. The particular discipline of a woman who had earned the right to move at her own pace and had decided the moment would arrive to her rather than the other way around. She sat beside Madam Yun. She greeted Director Yo Jin Beck, who squeezed both her hands and murmured something warm and mildly reproving about 3 months of radio silence. She accepted a glass of water and spoke quietly with 2 board members, answering their questions briefly and without performance. She let the room watch her being entirely comfortable in it. And she let Suan sit at the center table and absorb, in real time, in front of 400 witnesses, the full weight of what she had done. It took 17 minutes. Then Suan stood. She had rallied. This was, Molly had observed, one of Suan's genuine capacities, the ability to recover her composure and walk back into a room that had seen her lose it. She moved through the ballroom with practiced authority and the guests parted for her as they always had, because old habits were slower to change than a single evening's information. She stopped 3 feet from Molly. Looked at her with an expression working hard to be imperious and managing only unsettled. You need to explain yourself, Suan said. The head table went quiet. The tables around it went quiet. Half the room was listening. Molly set down her water glass. Rose. In the gold gown and the garden light of the chandeliers and the particular stillness of someone who has been preparing for a moment without quite knowing it, she looked like everything the evening's theme had promised and utterly failed to produce before her arrival. I'm Molly Bowman, she said. Her voice carried without effort. I'm the founder and executive director of the Bowman Foundation. I hold a doctorate in development economics from the London School of Economics, a master's in international law from Georgetown, and an honorary fellowship from the Seoul Institute of Public Policy, which your husband's father helped endow. She paused. I have spent the last 3 months in your household conducting a financial investigation. I now have complete documentation showing that $430,000 in charitable donations, routed through Kang Luxury Holdings CSR accounts, were redirected to a Macau-registered shell company linked to your brother's personal assets. The room was not breathing. That money was designated for foundation programs serving 47,000 beneficiaries across 11 countries, Molly continued. Even. Precise. The voice of a woman stating facts she has verified and which will not change regardless of the response they receive. It will be returned in full, with interest. The partnership between Kang Luxury Holdings and the Bowman Foundation will either be restructured under full transparent governance, or terminated entirely. Suan's mouth opened. The silence stretched. Then, you were my maid. It came out diminished. Entirely inadequate as a counter to what had just been laid in front of 400 people. I worked in your house, Molly said. Because the evidence that would have confirmed what you had done was inside it and belonged to me. So I came to collect it myself. She turned to the room. Every donation that was redirected will be restored, she said. The Foundation's work continues. What happened in these accounts does not alter what this community has built together. She looked back at Suan. You invited me here tonight to humiliate me in front of people you believed were yours. In front of donors who give to charitable work you were personally stealing from. I accepted because it gave me the opportunity to stand in front of this room as myself and account for every cent of their generosity that went missing. The sound that moved through the ballroom then was not applause yet. It was the collective exhale of 400 people who had been holding something since the doors opened and were now, finally, releasing it. Sue-Ann turned toward the edge of the gathering, where Jung Chul had arrived quietly at some point during the speech. He had the quality of a man who had been standing there long enough to have heard most of it and had decided, watching the room, that what was happening was both necessary and irreversible. Jung Chul. Sue-Ann's voice had the particular tone of a woman who had never, until this moment, genuinely needed her husband to intervene. Say something. Jung Chul looked at his wife. The room waited. Then he said, "The foundation will receive full restitution by Monday morning. My legal team will contact Director Beck with documentation. The partnership will be restructured under the terms Miss Bowman has outlined." He paused. "The rest is between my lawyers and Miss Bowman's." He did not look at Sue-Ann again. He looked at Molly. "I'm sorry it took this long," he said. The applause came then. From Director Yo-Jin Beck first, standing. Then the board members. Then the body of the room, gathering and building until the Grand Sejong Ballroom was doing something it had never done at a Kang Society gala before. Applauding someone who had been invited as a joke. The Society column ran the entrance photograph at the top of its digital edition before 6 a.m. The gold gown in the doorway. The ballroom beyond, every face turned. Madam Yun visible at the head table, mid-rise. The caption, Bowman Foundation Director Molly Bowman attends Kang Society Charity Gala. And below that, in smaller text, sources confirm Ms. Bowman conducted a financial investigation from inside the Kang estate. Full report to follow. Ren sent the link at 6:14. Message, 47,000 impressions in the first hour. It is everywhere. Molly was not at the Meridian when Ren sent it. She was in the eastern garden of the Kang estate, in the early morning grey, in a coat borrowed from the hook by the kitchen door, standing in the particular quiet of a space that had been looked at from a study window often enough to have accumulated some kind of meaning. She had returned not because she had to, but because there were things that needed to be concluded properly. The notebook. The file transfers to her legal team. A conversation with Nobby, who deserved to hear directly from Molly that what had happened last night had been in service of something larger than the gala. She found Nobby in the kitchen making tea. Told her, briefly, that she was leaving the position. Nobby stared at her for a long beat. Then said, "Were you really on the cover of Time?" "A few years ago." "I don't read Time," Nobby said, pushing a cup across the counter. "I feel like I should start." She sat down. "Thank you. For the linen nights. And the tea. You didn't have to do any of that." "You didn't need me for those," Molly said. "You were already doing everything right. You just needed someone to sit with you while you did." Tai-jun appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at them both, and said, "She's gone." Sue-Ann before dawn. "Family lawyer has been contacted. Restitution documents will reach you by Sunday." "Thank you, Tai-jun." He nodded once. There was something in the set of his expression, contained and professionally neutral, and also, clearly, something else entirely. "It was necessary work," he said. "You did it well." Then he was gone, which was how Tai-jun always concluded exchanges that said what they needed to. Molly heard Jung Chul before she saw him. His particular footstep in the corridor, she had learned it over 3 months, the way you learn sounds that mean something. Nobby picked up her tea with the instinct of someone who had learned a great deal about reading rooms, said she was going to check the linen, and was gone. Jung Chul came in. Sat across from her at the kitchen table. Morning light was coming through the window at a low angle, catching the rims of the 2 cups and the edge of the garden through the glass. He looked across the table at her. She looked back at him. "The press will want a statement," he said. "Ren is managing it. My lawyer will issue one by noon." "I know." He looked at his hands for a moment. Looked at her. "You could have done all of this differently. Sent lawyers. Done it from a distance. Clean and uncomplicated." "Yes. Why didn't you?" Molly turned her mother's bracelet on her wrist. There were several honest answers to that question, and most of them had layers she had been unwilling to examine until this particular morning, at this particular table, with this particular light coming through the glass. "I wanted to know if your father's instincts about people were something you inherited," she said. He was quiet. She watched him receive that and decide what to do with it, and then, with the restraint of a man who understood that some things deserved more space than a kitchen conversation could properly hold, decided to leave it where it was. "For now." "My mother wants to have dinner with you," he said instead. "Next week. She says there is a great deal she wants to tell you about your mother that you probably don't know. I'd like that very much." "She also wants to know," he said, with a carefully level delivery of someone stating something neutral that is also not neutral, "whether you're remaining in Seoul for the quarter." Molly looked at him. The question was Madame Yun's, and they both understood it was not only Madame Yun's. "The Foundation Seoul chapter has been underserved in terms of direct leadership for some time," she said. "I've been thinking the director role should be filled by someone who understands the landscape from the inside." "And do you," he said, "understand it from the inside now?" "Better than I did 90 days ago," she said. He almost smiled. The same contained almost smiles she had been watching in corridors and doorways and study windows. The one that had been staying just out of reach of whatever was keeping it there. "Then perhaps," he said, "the quarter is a reasonable place to begin." Molly drank her tea. Outside, Seoul was waking up. The society column was 47,000 impressions and climbing. Ren was managing a press cycle that would run for days. In 47 countries, foundation programs were intact, funding was returning, and the evidence that protected them was on its way to lawyers who would do what lawyers were for. At the head table last night, after the applause had settled, Madame Yun had leaned over and said quietly, "Your mother once told me that dignity is not given by the rooms you are permitted to enter. It is carried in the body of the person entering them." She had smiled. She was right. She usually was. 90 days on her knees. One night standing up. And a room full of people who would remember both for entirely different reasons. Molly set down her cup. Looked at Jungchul in the morning light. "Tell your mother I'll bring dessert." He looked at her. And the almost smile became the real one. It was, she thought, exactly as rare and exactly as worth waiting for as she had suspected from the beginning. End of part 1. Real talk. Suan walked into that gala holding every card she thought she had. Molly walked in with the foundation, the evidence, a gold gown, and Madame Yun already on her feet. Nobby is starting to read Time magazine. Taijun conducted himself with professional satisfaction. And Jungchul just smiled, the real one, over tea at 6 in the morning in a kitchen that now has a completely different atmosphere. And that is where we leave Molly Bowman, sitting at a kitchen table in a borrowed coat with her mother's bracelet on her wrist, watching the most controlled man in Seoul smile the real smile over 2 cups of tea at 6 in the morning. 90 days on her knees. One night standing up. And a room full of 400 people who will be talking about both for a very long time. If this story held you from the first sentence and you are still here, that means something. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell because part 2 of Molly and Jungchul's story is coming. and what Madam Yun has been holding back about Molly's mother, what the dinner table looks like when those two finally sit across from each other, and what Jungchul does with an entire quarter in the same city as the woman who just rebuilt his world from the floor up. None of that is going to wait quietly. But before you go, I need 3 things from you in the comments right now. First, Suan stepped over Molly in that hallway for 90 days and never once looked down. Did she deserve a bigger reckoning, or did Molly's restraint in that ballroom hit harder than any revenge could have? Second, Jungchul knew who Molly was for 2 full weeks and said nothing, did nothing, and let her stay. Was that the most quietly romantic thing in this entire story, or should he have said something sooner? Third, and this is the one that will split this comment section completely down the middle, Taijun knew for 4 weeks and Madam Yun knew from day 1. Which one of them is actually the most responsible for how that gala ended? Drop your answers below. I read every single one. And the first person who correctly guesses what Madam Yun tells Molly at that dinner about her mother, I will pin your comment for the entire run of this series. I am your storyteller. And Molly Bowman is not finished yet.